we're getting ready to go some off the water stuff, off the chart.
And we are live. Chris Graham and a cast of characters here. It looks like we're one of those ESPN argument shows. We need to argue more, I think. I got Scott German. I got Jerry Ratcliffe. I got Scott Ratcliffe with me here, our friends from JerryRatcliffe.com. And, hey, we're going to do the Ultimate ACC Tournament Day 2 today. But first, I wanted to start with some news. We got sports news to talk about. And, Jerry, you have the story on JerryRatcliffe.com. It's a top story on the front page of the site. Virginia makes the cut for a transfer. So, Jerry, tell us about that news there.
Yeah, we learned yesterday that Virginia made the Final Four list of a 6'8" wing from Rice University. His name is Trey Murphy III, originally from Durham, North Carolina. Played 2 years for the Owls. And his other Final Three schools are Villanova, Pitt, and Houston. He'll have 2 years of eligibility remaining, but he will have to set out next season unless he is granted a waiver from the NCAA. But he kind of proved himself as a three-point shooter last season, shot 39% from behind the arc for his 2 years at Rice, and averaged right around 14 points and 5.5 rebounds. So sounds like he might be a pretty good addition if they can haul him in.
So he would likely have to sit out that year. Would have 2 years of eligibility left, and he would fit into a crowded backcourt, I guess. I'm trying to think ahead. 2 years, with the guys coming in next year, Abdur-Rahim, Beekman, and McCorkle all being freshmen. You have Morcell, who would be a sophomore next year. Well, Tensa, I guess, comes off the books in 2 years, so that's one spot that opens up. Virginia's, it's a loaded roster already, and it would just be even more so with Murphy if he makes the choice.
Absolutely.
And so good news. Well, we got news there. It's fun, and right now we've been shut down for like a month from a sports standpoint. If we have sports news to talk about, we'll share it. And so that's great to see. So yesterday we were catching up on so much that we got late into our Ultimate ACC Tournament. It was Tuesday anyway. You don't pay much attention to the Tuesday games, right? But today we're going into the Wednesday action, and this would be one of our full days down in Greensboro if we were there. 4 games on the schedule today. And so we'll start the way I see the screen right now. I start with Scott Ratcliffe's below me. I know it's different on the Facebook Live, but Scott Ratcliffe's below me. Hootie, you're diagonal for me, and Scott German is top left of me. So I'm going to go in that order. Just to explain to people out there, this is what I see on Zoom anyway. I know the Facebook Live looks a little different for you folks watching. So Scott Ratcliffe, you're going to be on the hook here. Our first game today is actually the matchup, the 8-9 matchup. These two teams didn't play yesterday. They're the 8-9 game, though. And most ACC tournament years, the 8-9 game is a sort of a game that the winner gets to punch their ticket to the NCAA tournament. The loser has to wait until Selection Sunday. That's usually what it is. Most years that's the case. It wouldn't have been this year, but we got number 9 seed Wake Forest, number 8 seed Georgia Tech. And just for the sake of who these teams are, the number 9 seed Wake Forest is one of those Tim Duncan teams, 1995-96, a 26-6 season, NCAA regional final, ranked 9th in the final AP poll. A guy named Tim Duncan played for the team. It was an okay team. Georgia Tech's team we picked, the 2003-2004 team, went to the national championship game. Paul Hewitt as the coach somehow got to the national championship that year. And they were only 9-7 in the ACC, but had that nice run. So Georgia Tech and Wake. Scott Ratcliffe, how do you render this one?
I'd say despite Georgia Tech, being in the national championship game that year, like you said, it was kind of an anomaly. Kind of squeaked their way in a little, kind of back into the tournament and went on a great run. And without, with Wake Forest having Tim Duncan was one of the best players and obviously one of the best power forwards in college basketball history. So, and had some pieces around him as well. So I'm going to lean with the Deacons on this one.
I remember from the year before, 1995, when I left that ACC tournament that year, driving back, I caught an interview. I think Mac McDonald might have done on the Virginia Sports Radio Network. I left after Virginia lost to Wake Forest in that year's semifinals. I left in a huff, just came back home. And I caught Mac talking to Jerry West. And that year, Duncan was he was about a 9.8 rebound a game guy. He was still, early in his career, Randolph Childress scored the points for that Wake team. And that was also the year that Joe Smith was in the ACC coming out in the draft that year, Rasheed Wallace and Jerry Stackhouse. And so Mac McDonald said, all those great prospects here this week, who would you take with a first pick in the draft if you could pick all these guys? And he said Tim Duncan. He said the 9.8 rebound a guy. There's a reason Jerry West made a lot of money picking teams out, but he saw Tim Duncan before the rest of us did. 96, we all saw how good Tim Duncan was. So we got one for Wake Forest. Jerry Ratcliffe, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech in this matchup. Who do you got?
I got to go with my colleague on the other side of the thing there, Mr. Scott Ratcliffe. I remember both these teams very well and covered them both. I still can't figure out how Georgia Tech made it to the national championship game that year.
Yeah.
I just don't. They were 9-7 in the ACC, and I thought there were better Georgia Tech teams. Of course, none of them made it as far as this one did, but I still it boggles my mind that that team made it to the Final Four, let alone the championship game. The Wake Forest team with Tim Duncan, who I think won the Wooden Award that year, if I'm not mistaken, and was clearly a first-team All-American and ACC Player of the Year. That was just a really good basketball team. They were hard to beat, and I would pick Dave Odom to outcoach Paul Hewitt head-to-head any day. So I got to go with the Demon Deeks.
All right, Scott German, how does this go? Is it a unanimous decision, or do you cast a dissenting vote?
It's a unanimous decision. I think the discussion on that begins and ends with Tim Duncan. And I agree with Jerry. Coaching matchups, Dave Odom would get the best of Paul Hewitt probably 11 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 11. Tim Duncan was probably one of the best, maybe if there is an all ACC first team, how do you not have Tim Duncan on that team?
Oh, when we have to save that discussion. That might be a good one.
We will have an all ACC tournament team too.
We may actually start disagreeing with each other on that one. That might be fun. We had to pick this Georgia Tech team in this field because they did go to the final game. But I agree with Jerry Ratcliffe. There are a few better Georgia Tech teams at least. That Lethal Weapon 3 team where all three of those guys scored 20-plus points a game and went to a Final Four, but they didn't make a championship game. So we had to put Georgia Tech here in this one. And you had to see them ahead of Wake Forest. But it's kind of like sometimes you have a tournament in the seeding is based on resume, and it's clear that one team's better than the other. Wake Forest definitely better in this matchup. So they'll advance to Thursday, and they'll play the top seed North Carolina. That's going to be a fun one. Tim Duncan against Sam Perkins and Worthy and Jordan in that one. And so we'll start this time with Jerry Ratcliffe. Our next matchup, the winner would face the number 4 seed NC State. It's the number 5 seed in this case, Syracuse, the 2003 team with Carmelo Anthony, a Big East member. We'll clarify Ultimate ACC Tournament, but we allowed the non-ACC schools that joined in later, I guess, to have their best team from the past, and that's certainly the Syracuse team to win the championship would be that. Finished 30-5. They beat Kansas in the title game. They started that season unranked, and it was Carmelo Anthony's only season at Syracuse. And this Syracuse team will play a slight upset from yesterday, number 13 seed Miami, the 2013 ACC regular season and tournament champs. So Miami-Syracuse, Jerry Ratcliffe, what say you?
Got to go with the Orange men. Orange now, politically correct. I got to go with Syracuse. That was a pretty good basketball team. Finished 30-5. Beat Kansas for the national title. And like you said, Carmelo Anthony he was special, especially in college. I mean, he was almost unstoppable at times. I thought that was a good Miami team, but I just don't think they would have had everything that it takes to match up with this Syracuse team.
I think Hakeem Warren was also on that team, and they had it seems like Jim Boeheim recruits the types. There's always like a 6 foot tall white guy. This version of that was Jerry McNamara, who made threes.
Yeah,
Just a classic Syracuse team, and they won the championship there. So Scott German, Syracuse, Miami. What you got here?
Well, as much as I would like to say Miami could, Miami had a magical season. I don't think any of us will disagree with that. But I think I have to agree with Jerry. I'll go with Syracuse because they just were almost unstoppable with Carmelo Anthony. And I don't know if Miami would have had enough, had enough on the floor to be able to stop Anthony in that game. And as it turned out, it was his last game, but everyone knew that too. So, yeah, even though it was a great Miami team, they just, I think it would be close. I don't think it would be, I think it would be probably a one or two possession game, but I go with Syracuse.
All right, Scott Ratcliffe, tell us, is a unanimous decision, Syracuse, Miami. What you got?
Okay, I got to make it a unanimous. Syracuse had a little bit too much firepower. Had these two teams matched up on the floor. Like Scott said, that was a good Miami team, but just don't think they would have been able to pull that one off. Carmelo was obviously incredible. Like you said, Hakeem Warwick made that big block at the end of the championship game, and McNamara, as you said, was a gunslinger. So they had all the weapons for sure. I would definitely have to go with Syracuse in that.
Big athletic team that could shoot. Good. So they'll advance. We have a matchup tomorrow in the quarterfinals. The 1983 national champion NC State to 2003 national champion Syracuse. So we have our first matchup of national champs set for our Thursday quarters. Our next matchup would be the first game of the night session. Winner of this one plays the number 2 seed Virginia team, the 2019 national champs. It's the 7 seed Florida State, the 1972 national runners-up. And we're going to be leaning on Jerry Ratcliffe and Scott German a lot on this. Scott Ratcliffe, you and I are going to be, because I was born in 1972, a couple months after this game. So I'm
a few years behind you there too.
Yeah.
So
I cannot claim any knowledge in any way, shape, or form of this 1972 team, but they're matched up with a team that we all know well, the 2014-2015 Notre Dame team that won 32 games. So let's see. I'll start with Scott German this time. Scott German, what you got here?
Well, I'm gonna first of all use a disclaimer. I was 14 then, so it's not like my memory is that great. But I do remember, because I was starting to really get interested in basketball, and I really was a UCLA fan. But this was a great Florida State team. They were an independent team, and I did some research on them. Being an independent, they had a hard time finding opponents. And if you look at their schedule that year, it wasn't a real what you would call star-studded schedule, because they just had difficulty of being an independent. But they had some really good players. They had players that I'm sure Chris and Scott aren't going to even remember, but
I looked them up on sportsreference.com. I'm seeing names and I still don't know who they are. Go ahead.
They had 4 players that averaged in double digits that year. But so get to the game itself. They played UCLA. It was a dominating UCLA team. Jerry will attest to this. They were 29-0. They were rarely in competitive games at all. They played in the Pac-12, I guess it was in, or the
Pac-8 then. It would have been
Pac-8. And of course, they were led by Bill Walton. They were 29-0. As I said, they were rarely challenged in any game. So in the national championship game, Florida State, looking at my notes, Florida State actually led in that game midway through the first half, 23-14. Now, this I haven't understood. So they're at the time they were their big center, Lawrence McCray, who was 6'11", was frustrating Walton. This is a recap that I had. He was noticeably frustrating Big Bill, to the point that Walton a couple of times stormed off the court, berated an official because he thought he was getting fouled. He had Walton contained. Walton was quoting the article I read out of the Los Angeles Times, was noticeably frustrated.
Well, he was frustrated, Scott, because there were like 4 or 5 of the worst possessions in UCLA basketball history in that first half.
Exactly. So Florida State had a 9-point lead, but they called a foul on McCray. Now, this is what I don't understand. And it was McCray's 3rd foul. Midway, with about 8 minutes, 9 minutes to play in the first half. What's he doing on the floor with 2 fouls in the first half? Unless their coach, Florida State was coached by Hugh Durham, unless he felt like that's the only hope they had. Well, he goes to the bench. He doesn't really come back at all in the start the second half. And Walton just has his way, finishes with 24 points and 21 rebounds. UCLA takes a lead at half, comfortable most of the second half, but, ends up winning by 5 points. But it was their closest game by far that UCLA had all season. So FSU really gave the Bruins a game. And Wooden said afterwards that had McCray not gotten into foul trouble, he was terribly concerned that the Bruins weren't ready for that game.
So who you got?
So I'm gonna lean that FSU would beat a good Notre Dame team.
Okay, so now Scott Ratcliffe, you've heard all that news. You and I are completely blind to any of this. This is tough. This is the only tough one. But what do you got?
Yeah, it is. It's tough, just based on the fact that not being able to see the team play, but based on what Scott just described, that's obviously impressive to be able to hang with UCLA team, much less have a lead in the biggest stage imaginable. That being said, I would have to probably lean with Florida State. As good as Notre Dame was that season, they weren't a national championship contender. So, like you said, it was a tough choice, but I'm gonna have to go with FSU on this one.
So I've got the season schedule here for that UCLA team that year. They were 29-0 going into that game. One game up to that point that was single digits, and then the win over Florida State was 81-76. So that UCLA team truly was as dominant as Scott let on. One single digit win all the way back in January of that year, a win at Oregon State. Every other game was at least double digits, and you just see a lot of scores: 105-49, 110-81, 117-53 against named teams. So Jerry Ratcliffe, you have you remember? I think you said this was is it the first Final Four you covered?
No, the first one I covered was 74.
Oh, 74. Okay.
NC State and UCLA. I did watch this on TV, although I don't remember very much about it, to tell you the truth. They had a couple of good players, Florida State did, with Ron King, who was an All-American, I believe, and Reggie Royals, who I remember a little bit about. And Hugh Durham was a pretty decent coach. They had to beat Kentucky and North Carolina to get to the championship game. And that Carolina team was a pretty good Carolina team. But all things considered, I think I've got to go with Notre Dame on this one. I just think the Irish, coached by Mike Bray, pretty darn good coach. They had 32 wins in the 2014-15 season, and I just thought that was a really good basketball team. So I would go with Notre Dame in a squeaker.
If I was voting, I probably would go with Notre Dame too. But I would say my bias is that basketball, more current basketball, is better than older basketball. It's just a bias.
Yeah.
The players are better. They're better trained. They're better athletes. Not to say that players from that era, if they had the same access to training methods and everything else, they wouldn't be better today. But if you put that team versus a current team, I would probably almost always lean in the direction of the current team, though there'd be some exceptions, I guess, to that rule. But we'll advance Florida State by the split decision, 2-1.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
So let me add something. So since this is a mythical tournament or virtual tournament, however you want to say it. Bill Walton was quoted as saying, when asked about that game, that he was fouled heavily, and that the officials, it was probably one of the 6 worst officiating game he'd ever participated in. And when asked how many points he would score today against FSU in that game, he said about 18 points. And when someone said, "Really, Bill, only 18 points?" He said, "Yeah, because, man, dude, I'm almost 70 years old."
I was just thinking about those Florida State guys. If we have to cart them out there now, yeah, that might be a challenge. But we'll advance Florida State. They'll play Virginia tomorrow night, right, in the first game of the night session in Greensboro. The number 2 seed Wahoos will get the Florida State team. And now, I guess the last game of our session here for Wednesday. And we're all tired now. We've all been at the arena since about 10:30 in the morning. Woe is us. I always complain about this facetiously when we say, "Oh yeah, we're getting ready to go to the ACC tournament. We watch all these games and you're there all day long." Well, the 4th game is tiring. You're at this point, you got to find the energy. You got to kind of pull it all together.
And you can only eat so much.
Well, there is that. I mean, and the thing is, there's plenty to definitely get you eating too much. But there's a reason that we all come back from these tournaments about 10 pounds heavier. We had an upset yesterday in our 11-14 matchup, and Boston College, a really good Boston College team, obviously 2005-2006, upsetting the 11 seed Pitt team, the 2008-2009 team. So the Boston College team that went 28-8 in their inaugural ACC season, losing to Duke in the ACC Tournament Championship, going to the Sweet 16, losing to Villanova. They'll face a national champ from 1985-1986, the Louisville team, that has some of our love because they knocked off Duke in the championship game, and that's always a good thing. And Scott had 2 national champs to pick from here for Louisville, and picked the 85-86 team over the 1980-81 team. He kind of spelled out was a close vote. So we got number 6 Louisville, number 14 Boston College, and let's see, I'm starting here again with Scott Ratcliffe. Scott Ratcliffe, what do you got here?
That's another tough one. Based on the fact that I do remember watching that Louisville Duke championship game in that Final Four, but was in elementary school, so the memories aren't all that clear. But obviously, a national championship team that's saying something in and of itself. That Boston College team was good, very good in my opinion, but maybe not national championship worthy. So for that simple fact, I'm going to go with the Cardinals on this one.
I think that's a good analysis. Jerry Ratcliffe, what do you have here? You saw both these teams at their height. What do you think?
I actually covered that game in Dallas. I followed Duke through that tournament that year, and I would have to go with Louisville. Never Nervous Purvis was really good, particularly for a freshman. Would only get better, but they had a couple of other good players, Billy Thompson and Milt Wagner. Really good basketball team, and they beat a really good Duke team in the championship game. And I thought it was probably one of Denny Crum's best coaching jobs. The old Metro Conference champion.
That Duke team was Danny Ferry, Johnny Doggins.
I think
Barry. I think Billis was a role player on that team. Yeah, that was the team that really, moved things ahead for.
They weren't they? Wasn't that their big freshman class? His first big freshman class he had that, and nobody expected him to do anything, and they ended up in the national title. I might have my years wrong, but I think that might be right.
It's Dawkins, Allery, Dave Henderson, Tommy Amaker, Danny Ferry, Jay Billis, Billy King, Quinn Snyder. It's a pretty good group, actually, that they beat there.
Yeah, it really was. So, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. It's Louisville over BC in that one.
Scott German, what you got?
I'll make that unanimous because that was, it's hard to argue against a team that did win the national championship that year. And if you look back earlier in that tournament, when I was doing my research, they also beat some other good teams. They beat Carolina. en route to the national championship. A good North Carolina team. And I think it was maybe in the second round, maybe the Sweet 16. I'm not.
A funny note about that, Scott. I think if my memory serves correct, it might be the wrong year, but I think it's the same year. Is that the Carolina fans were actually hoping they would lose to Louisville rather than have to face Duke in a possible national championship game or something like that.
Yeah, I got it here. It looks like Carolina, it was a Sweet 16 matchup, actually, that Carolina lost to that Louisville team, but by 15 points as well. And that was a good Carolina team. Let's see who was on that Carolina team. That was probably Brad. I would imagine Brad Doherty was on that team. Brad Doherty, Kenny Smith, Joe Wolf, Steve Hale, Jeff Lebo, Warren Martin, Kevin Madden, a guy that Scott German and I would know. He played ball at Lee High School in Stanton, just up the road from us. I'm sure, Scott, you may have covered Kevin Madden. Do you remember writing about Kevin? Did you cover Kevin Madden when he played at Lee?
I remember the name, but.
Oh, I was asking Scott. I'm sorry, Scott.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah. Absolutely. Kevin and his brother too.
I was still in high school back in this age.
Mike played at Western Carolina. Mike may have actually been, and Kevin will tell you this, Mike probably was a better player than Kevin. Mike, I think, went on to play at Western Carolina, had a really solid college career there too. But
for us locally, there was a period of time we had Ralph Sampson playing in our district. Scott would have, I'm sure, covered. Maybe that was a little bit before your time covering, but then there was also Del Curry. There was Kevin Madden. There were some really good players in our little local area, which really in the last 35 years since hasn't produced anybody of that caliber. But for about a 5-year period, we had some really good players. Of course, Del, played 15 years in the NBA and most famously provided the DNA that led to Steph Curry, and Ralph was Ralph. So for a while there, the Valley was a really interesting place in terms of high school basketball.
Yeah, Chris, just up the road too from wasn't really competing in the Valley district, but may have played some of the Valley teams in some non-conference games was Kenny Lambiot.
Oh, the Spotswood team was in the district too. Yeah, Kenny and Lambiot both actually. Yeah.
And then you go way back, you got Mark Newland at Lee, who went on to play at UVA. So we had some really good players, but it's been a long dry run for the Valley for producing really, 4 or 5-star blue chip high school players.
Was Corey the last guy?
Yeah, Corey would have been, and he went away for his finishing up high school. He finished up at Oak Hill, but
right.
He played locally. I played against him in 8th grade ball way back in the day. That's when I realized basketball wasn't going to be what I made my name in, because there was that kid who could.
So, hey, Chris, can I tell you a real quick story about Corey?
Oh, sure, yeah.
A good one, in case he's listening.
Okay, good one. Thank you, yeah.
So Corey and I've known Corey since he was 7 years old. He lived across the hall from me in the same apartment building. Used to take Corey to the city park and shoot hoops with him, and just knew Corey as he was growing up. And then as he got in high school, he used to play pickup ball with us at Waynesboro High School. And the pickup games were run by former Waynesboro coach Dick Lotz, who I know Chris will know. So once Corey started getting really good, one summer night, Corey wanders into the gym and starts shooting around. Coach Lotz hadn't gotten there yet, and we're starting to shoot for teams. Coach Lotz walks in the gym, sees Corey in there, and orders him out of the gym and basically says, "You do not belong in here playing with us. You're going to get hurt."
Yeah.
So I kind of give myself a little credit for taking, for maybe making Corey the player he is or he was by actually not getting a chance to play with him when he got really good.
Credit or blame? Are you responsible for him not passing the ball?
Probably, yeah, because I never passed it.
Yeah, so you set a bad example, and Corey never learned not to do that. Yeah, some good stuff there.
If you pass the ball, you may not get it back.
It's a way. Having played at the Waynesboro YMCA myself for years, that's the way things work there. Yeah, it's pretty much the way. Maybe every YMCA works the same way. So to finish that out, Louisville will advance to play Duke. Boy, a rematch of sorts. I mean, Louisville playing Duke. That Duke team that we'll have them playing tomorrow is the 1991-1992 team that won a second national championship in a row. Christian Laettner, Thomas Hill, Grant Hill, Bobby Hurley, that group. So we're getting down to the good stuff here. Our matchups tomorrow will be, again, Carolina, the 1981-82 North Carolina team will play the 1995-1996 Wake Forest team. Virginia, the number 2 seed, the 2019 national champs, will play the 1972 national runners-up Florida State. Then you have number 3 Duke, the 1992 national champs against national champs from 1986 Louisville, and then the 4-5 matchup, 83 national champs NC State, 2003 national champs Syracuse. So all these teams, we got 6 national champs. We got a national runner-up, and then the one team that's the sore thumb had Tim Duncan and was the number 1 seed in the tournament. So this is not a bad field for our quarterfinal Thursday.
I think most people would buy a ticket to see all those games.
That's right. We wouldn't be greedy. Just give me one of those games, and we get a chance to talk through all 4. So I guess we can start wrapping up here. I'll give some final thoughts. And I'll start with Scott Ratcliffe. Final thoughts on Ultimate ACC Tournament. Anything else you have on your mind right now, Scott?
Well, this just want to say this is a fun to go back and put these great teams up against each other, and I'm excited to see how this all plays out here for the rest of the way. And on my mind, personally, just waking up and thinking about where we were a year ago today. Definitely the most memorable day of my life, I can say that. So in Minneapolis for the Final Four for the national championship, and it's going to be a special day probably for Wahoo fans. For April 8th will ring in Wahoo lore for years to come. So
I had to look around, but I got to hold this up here. This look familiar to anybody? That's after it was over about 1 a.m. as we were leaving or being forced out of the football stadium. They're already tearing it up and making it a football stadium again. I picked up some confetti, and that confetti is going to be here. That's going to go in when I get buried, hopefully in 50 years. Hopefully I have my, life goes for a long time, but that's being buried with me right there. So yeah, that memorable day, Scott Ratcliffe, I totally agree. And I'll never forget that whole weekend. And plus the special aspect for me and my wife, Crystal, she's a Minnesota native, doesn't get back home very often. And for her, she got to drag me to her hometown, Owatonna, Minnesota, about an hour south of Minneapolis. And so when will I ever get back to Owatonna, Minnesota? I ate an authentic, what they call Juicy Lucy, double hamburger patty with cheese melted in the middle. I make them all the time now. So, yeah, Minnesota's got a special place in my heart, and that's going to be buried with me. Thanks for bringing that up, Scott. I'm glad you mentioned that. We have to remember those good times, right?
Oh, man, just the whole ride last year was just unforgettable. I mean, I couldn't imagine personally anything that could top it. Just because I love basketball so much, and especially college basketball, and just always wanted to be at a Final Four. Just so for me personally, it really can't be beat. So
when I watched the replay of the game recently, I knew where I was sitting and I knew where you were sitting. I didn't know where Jerry was sitting. I don't know why. I didn't know, Jerry, exactly where you're sitting on press right. Of course, when you're watching the game and you see all those heads, but I could find my bald head and I could find you, Scott. So I saw us a couple of times and, hey, there we were. So yeah, that was awesome. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, Dad was actually sitting right next to me. So
okay. Well, next time I watch, I'll look for Jerry too. I should have thought about that, but that would have made sense.
Yeah, it's crazy because we were right in front of where a guy was fouled on that 3-point shot against Auburn. I mean, that happened literally right in front of us. So
did you hear the whistle? Because where Zach Peerless and I were for that game on championship game night, I was on the floor right behind Jim Nance. But for the semifinal game, I was behind the Auburn basket, I guess. So when that foul happened in front of you, with all the noise in the arena, did you know what happened?
At first, I thought I might have heard a whistle, but I mean, it was really loud in there, obviously. But I remember, Dad, asking you, do you think he got fouled there? Was that a foul there? Because it was a kind of a chaotic moment, and obviously we knew something was going on because the players were kind of standing around and everything.
We didn't have the replay that folks at home had either. I mean, they got to see. I've watched that broadcast so many times now. They got every little split second of the Zapruder film of that foul in the arena. We thought the game was over. So I mean, yeah, you're totally right. So Jerry Ratcliffe, your last thoughts, including anything about today being the 1-year anniversary of the championship.
Yeah, I didn't hear the whistle, but I did see the referee running up, and I said, well, wait a minute, I don't think this is over, because I thought it was over too. But once I saw the official make a move, I said, I don't think this thing's over. I think he's calling a foul. And incredible moment. I've been covering Virginia basketball since the 82 season, 81, 82. And definitely one of the most magical moments. I went to one other Final Four with Virginia back in Seattle in 83, 84 was the year after Ralph. But what made last year special for me was I was able to share it with Scott. Because when he was all through my career, I would be all over, traipsing all over the country. I was fortunate back when I first came to Charlottesville, I had a publisher who believed in spending a lot of money. He didn't care how much money he spent as long as it entertained the readers. And he was a huge basketball fan. His name was Bill Kirkland. If there was a Publishers Hall of Fame, he would be in it. And if Virginia ever bailed out of if they ever lost somewhere along the way in the NCAAs, Bill would hire these stringers at other sites around the country where other ACC teams were, and he would have them cover them until Virginia, if Virginia would lose, then I would pick up with Duke or Carolina or NC State or somebody from that point on. So I was traipsing all over the country. Scott was in school, obviously, and I would always bring him home souvenirs from Final Fours and stuff. So it meant a lot to me that he got to go to one and experience it, and the ultimate experience, really, the team that he grew up loving won it all. And I grabbed him some confetti myself before I left Florida. I went up on the floor and started interviewing players and Katie Couric and anybody I could find up there. And so I grabbed him some confetti, and it's still in his room on his dresser drawer. So, but yeah, this has been fun. It's been a walk down memory lane for me, because I covered every one of these teams in the tournament except for that Florida State team you mentioned. And the funny thing about that was not long after that, I got to interview John Wooden in the speaking engagement he was having at East Tennessee State University. So brings back a lot of memories.
One other prop I'll bring up here. These are the shoes that I was wearing. They touched the floor after the national championship. They're all I've retired those shoes. Those are expensive running shoes from Ragged Mountain Running Shop, I should mention, one of your sponsors, Jerry.
Absolutely.
Folks there. I had to retire those shoes because nothing could happen to those shoes. They touched the floor. And so they're always going to be hallowed. Scott German, last thoughts, wrapping up. This is your Ultimate ACC Tournament, and of course also 1 year anniversary. You weren't able to be with us because you were near death with pneumonia for a while there, but you, as a result, got to experience it with Wahoo Nation in Charlottesville, and you had a very different experience and a very positive experience yourself last year, a year ago today.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you to all of you. I thought we were friends. So if you can give me a few seconds, I'll go and dig up my memorabilia from the Final Four, which is an empty packet of antibiotics. It's a little bottle. I think it was amoxicillin. So that's my memory of the Final Four. So thanks for rubbing it in. But no, I did get to, I was feeling well enough to travel to Charlottesville and got to watch both the semifinal and finals with my son, who I've, shamelessly turned into a humongous UVA fan, and to a point where
you ruined your son.
I ruined him. Yes.
Yeah. Your son is completely ruined to any reality because I've been on these trips with you guys, and he is. Folks out there who know Scott German and how neurotic he is about UVA basketball, his son is an apple that didn't fall too far from the tree. And actually, he's probably Scott. I think he's got you.
He may. You said something earlier about leaving the ACC tournament 1 year in a huff. I can't imagine you ever leaving a game and being in a huff about something.
No, that's never
Just
happened.
surprising.
No, we've never driven back in the middle of the night from Charlotte for no reason or anything like that. So no, very rare. Only once every 25 years or so.
Yep, and that's the game that drive back from Charlotte after the UMBC loss. My son was with me, and after about a year of counseling, he seems to be coming through okay now.
But I do have to say that all that year of counseling and then the first half of Gardner Webb and that year of counseling went out the door in about 45 minutes.
Yeah, so counseling is overrated. You know, you can undo it. You can undo all the good in just a few minutes.
Are much more fragile than we let on, right? Yeah.
I think that's when I found out about the true Scott German when we were sitting up there and I turned around and we were going to do a Facebook Live or something. And I said, where did Scott go? And he said, Scott can't take it. Scott's out walking around somewhere.
Yeah. Well, the ACC tournament, Scott, you got to tell this story since we got a few minutes before our hour's up here. You got to tell the story of the ACC tournament game. And this was not the NCAA. It was not the Final Four. It was the NC State game to start the ACC tournament. And Scott, you had a fun time there too.
Yeah, I just got a little too much. You know, heart rate was up, and I just told Chris, "See ya, I'm out of here." And I walked out of the Spectrum Center, walked out into the streets. Didn't leave the facility. I did leave the facility. Didn't leave the grounds. Found a security guard. Asked him if I could stand with him for a while, and I said, "You're not by chance listening to the basketball games, are you?" And he said, "No, man, I don't really get into them." And I said, "Good, I'm staying with you for about the next half an hour." So stood out there, walked back in, and UVA had erased an 8-point lead. Missed Jack Salt scoring 3/4 of his entire career point total. But, you know, it worked, Chris.
Yeah, literally Scott sits beside me, and he leaves. I think it was right. I think we were down 6, 7, 8 points. And it comes back. I mean, literally, he's gone this long. Virginia's already winning by 20 points. And I'm thinking, well, I didn't pay attention to where he were. Jerry had come over and said, "Where's Scott?" And I'm like, I don't know. He may have left the state of Carolina by now, for all we know. You know, so Scott sits down beside me, and I'm thinking he's probably watched from a portal or something like that. And so I looked at him and I said, "So, man, what a great run there, Jack Salt. You know, he just had 15 points." And Scott looks at me and says, "Really? Jack Salt had all those points?" And like, Scott, you just missed Jack Salt score 15 of his career, 18 points. I mean, that's all he's ever going to do in his career at UVA. And so, but yeah, I guess it worked for Scott. He's still alive with us. He's still with us, I'm sure. So that's a good thing.
You know, yeah, I am. It worked. It saved my life. So going back to our tournament, it's just a lot of people would say Thursday's when the real tournament begins. But if you look at these matchups, and Jerry, you can, since we've got a couple minutes, it goes beyond the teams. Wake and Carolina, Syracuse and Duke, FSU and Virginia, Louisville and Duke, Wake and Carolina, Dave Odom, Dean Smith, Syracuse, Jim Boeheim coached Syracuse team with Coach K. FSU, not unless you're one of the two of us, you don't know much about Hugh Durham, but look at the matchup Tony's got to coach against. A red hot FSU team that pushed UCLA to the limit. Arguably maybe one of the best ever college basketball players, Bill Walton. And then Louisville,
the best college basketball players of all time.
Of all time. So that's what that's the team that pushed Walton to that got Walton so frustrated. Tony's got to coach against that team. And then Louisville, Duke, Denny Crum. I said Syracuse. Louisville was playing who, Chris? I lost my computer. Louisville's matched up against
playing Duke.
Yeah.
And then NC State's playing Syracuse. So Valvano.
So Syracuse, Jim Boeheim against the Jim Valvano team that we know the magical run they had to the national championship. So talk real briefly about those great coaches. The coaching matchups in those games would be as intriguing as the player matchups.
You got a lot of Hall of Fame coaches in there, and one who's going to be in the Hall of Fame from here in Charlottesville. So I mean, if this was a real basketball tournament instead of a fantasy tournament, I would like to see what the tickets would be going for, what the scalpers would be getting. You got some of the greatest coaches that have ever graced the hardwood, and obviously some of the greatest players too, and some great teams. Yeah, it's been fun during my career to have gotten to know a lot of these guys and interviewed them and written about them. I think Hugh Durham actually went on and coached at Georgia after the Florida State thing, or maybe it was before. I think it was after.
Yeah, it was after, Jerry.
Yeah, I think that's what I thought.
And he had some really good teams. I mean, Hugh Durham is a name that kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, but Hugh Durham was a really good college basketball coach.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you just got some great coaches there, and I have a couple of Jim Valvano stories from that tournament out in Ogden, Utah, when they upset Virginia, which I thought was the best team in the country that year and should have won it all, but NC State found the magic and found a way to pull it off.
Hey, Jerry, I just Googled something about Hugh Durham. He's still alive, 82 years old. He's the only head coach to have led two different programs to their first ever Final Four. He led Florida State and Georgia to the Final Four. First time either school had been to the Final Four. He ended up coaching at Jacksonville, but he had over 500 career wins.
Wow, pretty impressive.
Yep. So all 8 coaches are, Hall of Fame type coaches, in my opinion.
So as we're wrapping up here, let me ask Jerry and Scott, are you guys free for tomorrow? I hope so. And we can help us flesh this out tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so keep on the line here. We'll wrap up our Facebook Live. We'll figure out the time for tomorrow. We'll put that on the website. Scott German will have a story. We'll put that time out there for everybody. But I want to thank everyone for joining us here on the live broadcast. And thanks to all of our guests for being here with us here on Augusta Free Press. For JerryRatcliffe.com and for AugustaFreePress.com, I'm Chris Cram signing off. Everyone have a great day.